He was 65 years old and driving a white Chevrolet sedan through a landscape that did not care whether he succeeded or failed. The car was his bedroom, his office, and his dining room. In the back seat, a pressure cooker. In the trunk, a container of his seasoned flour mixture. In his pocket, $105 from Social Security, which was at that moment the entire financial foundation of his life. He pulled into a parking lot in front of a small restaurant in a town whose name he would forget within a week. He had no appointment. He had no guarantee that anyone would speak to him. He had a recipe and a belief that was beginning to look like delusion. He walked inside, asked to speak to the owner, and began to explain what he was offering: the right to use his method of frying chicken under pressure, combined with his proprietary blend of 11 herbs and spices. In exchange, the restaurant would pay him a small royalty per chicken sold. The owner listened. The owner nodded, and then the owner said no. That moment happened more than 1,000 times before it happened any other way. 1,000 rejections. 1,000 doors closed in the face of a man who had already outlived most of his contemporaries and had nothing to show for it but a folder of failures and a car that smelled like cooking oil. It would take 1,000 no's to arrive at a single yes, and that arithmetic would define the rest of his life. If a story like this makes you wonder what lies on the other side of your own no's, then subscribe. This channel exists to follow the thread from rejection to reconstruction, one ruin at a time. And I want to know, what is the number of rejections you have faced that you still carry? Leave it in the comments. That number is not a shame. It is a ledger of persistence. This is the story of how one of the most recognizable brands in the world began not with a young genius in a garage, not with venture capital, not with a brilliant insight that arrived like a bolt of lightning. It began with an old man who had run out of options, who had been told no by everyone who mattered, and who had exactly one thing left: a recipe that nobody wanted. But first, you need to understand who this man was before he became the face on the bucket. Because the 65-year-old man driving through the heat of summer was not the beginning of the story. He was the end of a long series of failures that had been accumulating since childhood. And the weight of those failures was the invisible passenger in the passenger seat. He was born in a small farmhouse in Henryville, Indiana, in a year when the average American life expectancy was just over 50 years. By the time he was 5 years old, his father had died. His mother worked 16-hour days sewing clothes to keep the family alive, which meant that the boy, the one who would later become the face of a global empire, was left in charge of cooking for his younger siblings. He learned to make bread and vegetables over a wood stove because there was no one else to do it. He was 6 years old. By the time he was 7, he could feed a family. By the time he was 10, he was working on local farms for pennies a day. By the time he was a teenager, his mother had remarried, and the new arrangement did not welcome him. He left home at 16 without a plan, without savings, and without any sense that the world owed him anything. What followed was not a steady climb toward greatness. What followed was a series of jobs, each one ending in disappointment or failure. He worked as a farmhand. He worked as a railroad fireman. He worked as a soldier in Cuba, though he never saw combat. He worked as a streetcar conductor. He worked as a salesman selling insurance, tires, and lamps. He studied law by correspondence course and practiced for a few months before a courtroom brawl ended that career. He opened a ferry boat company on the Ohio River that failed. He manufactured acetylene lamps and tried to sell them to the gas industry. That failed too. He was not a prodigy. He was not a visionary who had been marked by destiny. He was a man who tried things, watched them collapse, tried something else, and watched that collapse too. By the age of 40, he had failed more times than most people attempt. By the age of 50, he had nothing that resembled a career. By the age of 60, he was living on veterans' pension checks and a small Social Security payment, drifting through a life that had given him no indication that anything was about to change. And then, almost by accident, he opened a small service station in Corbin, Kentucky, on the edge of a highway that carried travelers through the Appalachian foothills. The station sold gasoline. It also served food, sandwiches, steaks, vegetables, to the people who stopped to fill their tanks. The food was good. Word spread. Within a few years, the service station had expanded into a full restaurant seating more than 100 people, with a motel attached. He called it Sanders Court and Cafe. For the first time in his life, something was working. He was not wealthy, but he was stable. He had a reputation among travelers along that stretch of highway. His fried chicken, cooked in a cast-iron skillet and served with mashed potatoes and gravy, had become a regional attraction. He was 62 years old, and he had finally built something that looked like a foundation. But he did not know what was coming. The American interstate highway system was being planned, and the route that would carry the new Interstate 75 was being drawn. It would bypass Corbin, Kentucky, by several miles. The travelers who had made his restaurant a destination would no longer pass his door. The cars would be gone. The customers would be gone. The business that had taken him a decade to build would be reduced to an afterthought. He did not know this yet, but the future was already arriving, and it had no interest in his story. The highway diverted in the mid-1950s. Traffic through Corbin dropped to nearly nothing. The restaurant, the motel, the entire operation that had been his first real success, it collapsed. He sold the property at auction to pay his debts. He was 65 years old, and he was left with exactly what he had started with: his Social Security check, his pressure cooker, and his recipe. But here is where most accounts get it wrong. The collapse of the restaurant was not the moment that broke him. It was the moment that forced him to think differently. Because when the highway took his customers, it did not take his knowledge. It did not take the method he had developed for frying chicken under pressure, in a fraction of the time it took conventional methods. It did not take the blend of herbs and spices he had perfected over years of trial and error. Those things still existed, and he still believed they had value, even if no one else did. Have you ever been in a position where every option looked bad, and the only question was which bad option you could live with? That is not weakness. That is the reality of every real comeback story. The people who rebuild are not the ones who found a perfect solution. They are the ones who chose the bad option and made it work. That moment when the restaurant collapsed and he chose to keep driving rather than stop is the hinge on which everything else turns. If you are here because you are in that hinge yourself, subscribe and stay with us. This channel is built for the people who are still choosing the bad option and making it work. And in the comments, tell me, what was the bad option you chose when every door seemed closed? Your answer belongs with the rest of this story. For Sanders, the bad option was this. He would drive from restaurant to restaurant, cook his chicken for the owners, and ask them to pay him a small royalty for every chicken they sold using his method. He would not open a new restaurant. He would license his recipe and his technique to people who already had restaurants. It was not a glamorous idea. It was not a billion-dollar vision. It was a man in a car with a pressure cooker hoping that someone, somewhere, would say yes. He drove across Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Indiana. He walked into small diners and roadside cafes, asked for the owner, and presented his offer. In the first 2 years, he was rejected more than 1,000 times. 1,000 times. He heard everything. The chicken was too expensive. The process was too complicated. The royalty was too high. The product was unproven. He was too old to be taken seriously. Some owners were polite, some were dismissive, some laughed at him. He was a man in his late 60s wearing a white suit that had seen better days, traveling alone, sleeping in his car because he could not afford motels, knocking on doors that opened only to close again. The rejection was not occasional, it was relentless. It was the texture of his daily life. And yet, something happened during those years that no one could have predicted. Each rejection taught him something. He refined his pitch. He adjusted his terms. He learned which kinds of restaurants were worth approaching and which were not. He began to understand that his product was not just chicken, it was consistency. If he could guarantee that every restaurant using his method produced the same quality, he would be selling something more valuable than a recipe. He would be selling a system. The first yes came in the form of a small restaurant in Salt Lake City, Utah. The owner, a man named Pete Harmon, had heard about the old colonel who was driving around the country with a pressure cooker. Harmon was skeptical, but he agreed to try the chicken. He sold $37 worth of it on the first day. Within a few months, he had added a separate menu section devoted entirely to what he called Kentucky Fried Chicken. Harmon also noticed something that Sanders had not fully appreciated. The name Colonel Sanders had a certain ring to it. It sounded established, it sounded trustworthy, it sounded like someone who knew what he was doing. Harmon began using the Colonel's image in advertising, a white-haired, goateed man in a black string tie and white suit, looking like a Southern gentleman who had been cooking chicken his entire life. The image was not planned. It was not a marketing strategy from a boardroom. It emerged organically from the collaboration between an old man and a restaurant owner who understood that people buy from faces more than they buy from names. The image became the brand, and the brand began to spread. From that first restaurant in Salt Lake City, the model replicated outward. Each new franchise paid a small upfront fee and a continuing royalty. Each franchise agreed to follow the same process, the same pressure fryers, the same seasoning blend, the same preparation standards. Sanders did not need to be in every kitchen. His system was. By the time he reached his 70s, the number of Kentucky Fried Chicken outlets had grown to several hundred. By the time he reached his mid-70s, it was in the thousands. By then, the man who had been rejected 1,000 times had become one of the most recognizable faces in American commerce. Not because he was young, not because he was rich, not because he had access to capital or connections, but because he had found a model that could carry his idea farther than he could carry it alone. He sold the company in 1964 for $2 million, a sum that, at the time, was the largest acquisition in the fast food industry. He stayed on as a brand ambassador, traveling the world, appearing in commercials, shaking hands with governors and presidents. He was no longer the man sleeping in a Chevrolet. He was the man in the white suit, smiling from a billion paper buckets. But the price of that success, the relationships he lost, the parts of himself he had to leave behind, the years he spent alone on the road while his family waited for him to give up. That is a different kind of reckoning. And it is a reckoning that every success story eventually faces. There is a photograph taken in the early 1960s before the sale. Sanders is sitting in a small office surrounded by paperwork. His face is tired. His eyes are focused on something off camera. He is not smiling. He looks like a man who has been fighting for so long that victory feels foreign. That photograph is not in the company's marketing materials. It is not on the bucket. But it is the most honest image of Colonel Sanders that exists, because it shows the man before the myth, the one who kept driving even when there was no reason to believe the next door would open. Sanders did not succeed because age did not matter. He succeeded because at an age when most people stop adapting, he finally found a model that could carry his idea farther than he could carry it alone. That model was franchising, but the engine behind it was not a business plan. It was the accumulated weight of 1,000 rejections, each one filing down the rough edges of his approach until what remained was sharp enough to open a door. What he learned in the ruin was this: when you have nothing left to lose, you are free to fail in ways that people with something to lose cannot afford. And that kind of freedom is terrifying. But it is also the only kind of freedom that has ever built something from nothing. The partner who helped him during those early franchise years, Pete Harmon, has his own story, one that reveals something about the people who recognize value before it looks valuable. That is a story for another video, but the thread that connects them is the same one that runs through every story on this channel. The moment between ruin and reconstruction, when the only thing left is a choice. That choice, to keep moving without a guarantee, is the exact thing we return to here, video after video. If you have not yet subscribed, now is the moment. Do not let this be the only story you hear from this channel. There is always another founder sitting in their own Chevrolet, and we will be there when the next door opens. And before you go, leave one word in the comments, the word that names the space between your own fall and your decision to rise. That word is part of the record. He built what he built because he learned something in the ruin that most people never learned in success. He learned that the thing you are most afraid of losing is often the exact thing you need to lose. And that is not a lesson you can learn from a book. It is a lesson you can only learn by living through it, as he did, as many have, and as you will, someday, in your own way. Built from ruin, because nothing extraordinary was ever built from comfort. There is a story that Sanders told late in his life, when interviewers pressed him about the secret to his resilience. He said it was not optimism, it was not faith, it was not even stubbornness. It was something simpler. He had run out of alternatives. When a man has been told no 1,000 times, the word loses its power to wound. It becomes a sound, nothing more. And once rejection becomes meaningless, the only thing left to do is keep moving forward, because stopping would mean accepting a verdict he refused to believe was final. That refusal was not heroic. It was not the stuff of legend. It was the quiet, grinding work of a man who understood that his time was limited, and that every rejection brought him closer to a yes, not because the universe owed him anything, but because the numbers were on his side. He had lived long enough to know that persistence was not a strategy. It was the only available option. And he had lived long enough to know that options do not need to be good. They just need to exist. The company he built continued to grow long after he was no longer in control. It became a symbol of American entrepreneurship, of the idea that anyone can start over at any age, regardless of how many times they have failed before. But that symbol is incomplete. It leaves out the years of silence, the nights in the car, the voices that told him he was wasting his time. It leaves out the fact that most people who try what he tried never succeed. That is the part that does not fit neatly into a lesson. There is no guarantee at the end of the story. There is only a man who made a choice, over and over again, until the choice became inevitable. And in that inevitability, there is something worth remembering. The arc of a life is not determined by the number of times you fall. It is determined by what you do in the space between the fall and the decision to rise. That space is where Sanders lived for years. It is where every rebuilding happens, and it is where the shape of what comes next is forged in silence, far from applause, far from recognition, known only to the one who endures it. He died in 1980 at the age of 90. By then, his face was among the most recognized on the planet. He had been honored by governors, celebrated by presidents, and imitated by countless entrepreneurs who wanted to replicate his unlikely arc. But the photograph from the early 1960s, the one where he is not smiling, remained the truest portrait. It captured the man who had not yet been proven right, the man who was still driving, still knocking, still holding the recipe that nobody wanted. That man did not need to be proven right to keep going. He kept going because stopping was never a real option. And in that refusal to stop, he built something that outlived him, something that millions of people would encounter without ever knowing the full weight of the years that brought it into existence. Built from ruin.